So we've been doing a lot of Van Halen videos lately, and what can I say? They've always had a place in my heart. I've always loved them. But this might be the favorite thing that I've found as far as making a video. Now, what we do a lot on this channel, as you know, is we go back and read record reviews and concert reviews and stories and interviews, so many different things. But this particular one really hit home with me. And it's about Van Halen. It's a little kind of interview, and it was put out. This was about 9 months after their first album came out. So they were still, the second one wasn't out yet, and they were being very, very successful at this point. But they kind of talk a little bit about why. Why did Van Halen take off the way they do? And it's not, what's great about this little article that I'm going to share with you is not just related to the music, but there's this bigger picture life message when you read this story. Because the idea, the thing that they drive to is that what Van Halen did is they kind of got back to the basics of what rock and roll is supposed to be. And it's so fascinating because when you watch the ebb and flow of popular music, it seems like every once in a while, as music starts drifting off and it starts being taken too seriously by too many people, all of a sudden, some band pops up that just gets back to the basics and they just skyrocket. Happens all the time. And they talk about this point in this article, and I think if you like Van Halen and you kind of like the philosophy behind what I just said, you'll love listening to this article. Again, this is early on in Van Halen's career, and they're still trying to make sense of what's going on. They're taking off. They're getting huge at this point. And so anyway, I think you'll really enjoy this. So this is from the Sun News, November 12th, 1978. And again, remember the first album came out in February, so this is about 9 months into the first album. And there's a picture, if you're watching this rather than just listening to it, you'll see there's a picture of Eddie Van Halen there. And right underneath his picture, it says Van Halen. Guitarist Edward Van Halen is one member of the four-man rock band Van Halen, which in contrast to the fluff and elaboration that characterizes much of today's rock music, has had great success with a formula of simple, hard and fast rock and roll. The group represents what rock and roll used to be, unadorned, fun music. Okay, so the title of the article is Van Halen Simple Rock. All right, Los Angeles, Associated Press. Deep down in the core of rock music's new wave, below the showy nonsense and the silly tough guy arrogance, there lives a good, healthy premise. Rock and roll has forgotten its basics. Scores of bands have jumped in line behind the new wave banner and used the back to basics theme as a cosmetic to hide an ugly little blemish that afflicts a good many of their number, a lack of talent. But Van Halen, an LA-based four-man band, has seized the idea of simple rock and demonstrated the talent to capitalize on it. Van Halen represents what rock and roll used to be, and what it might well become again, good, unadorned, fun music. The band's history is classic. The group was born when two rival high school bands merged. And of course, this was Mammoth, which is what Eddie Van Halen was in, and the Red Ball Jets. I think that's what they were called, or Red Ball Jets, which is what David Lee Roth was in. And then the band, Van Halen apparently used to rent the PA from Red Ball Jets. And then they ended up, putting Van Halen, what we would know as Van Halen, together. Okay. The new band wore out the small-time beer circuit, playing a repertoire of memorized top 40 songs, toting their equipment from gig to gig, and sometimes working more than 145-minute sets a week. They became local favorites. One night, Mo Austin, president of Warner Records, caught their act at a local club and signed the band. Their first album, Van Halen, reached platinum status, which means more than 1 million units sold. It says that there. Quote, "It's incredible. Everybody's going nuts over the thing," says David Roth, the ebullient lead singer of the group. "And we've been traveling, England, Europe. I mean, it's incredible." The band's formula is simple. hard, fast rock and roll, shorn of the fluff and elaboration that has bogged down pop rock in recent times. Almost all of Van Halen's songs, like their national hit rendition of the Kinks' old You Really Got Me, clock in at 3 minutes or less. Their machine gun guitar work and hard-hitting style has prompted, scrolling to the top, comparisons with heavy metal heroes like Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath. But Roth will hear none of it. Quote, those heavy metal guys, they did 20-minute songs, long solos, and lyrics about outer space and other things I can't relate to. I love these quotes from David Lee Roth, because if you're familiar with him, you can almost hear his voice when you read these things. Okay. And then he continues the quote, but Van Halen, we're children of the 80s, you know? By the way, that's so interesting to hear him say this, because this is written again in 78. And he says, we're children of the 80s, which I unless I'm missing something, because I'd never seen this in an article written in the 70s, but it must be this kind of forward look to we're the future. I'm assuming that's what it means, unless somebody watching this knows something I don't. Okay. But listen, he explains it perfectly. But Van Halen, we're children of the 80s, you know? We've got short attention spans, so our songs are shorter. They've got choruses you can sing along with. There are lots of melodies, but it's all delivered with maximum impact. Unquote. Van Halen, Roth, bassist Michael Anthony, drummer Alex Van Halen, guitarist Edward Van Halen, shun the lush trimmings that have adorned rock's recent products. It's a young band. Their average age is 23. Their music is sometimes primitive, but the hard-driving energy of those 3-minute outbursts of rock and roll showcase the good time nature of the art. Quote, you always get back to the basics, says Roth. And Van Halen is about as basic as you can get. Guitars, drumming, and singing. That's what we're selling Van Halen on. We're the real thing. We look like we sound on stage and off. It's not a put-on job. It's not putting a lot of makeup on or a big stage production. It's just giving the people the real thing. Unquote. As for further commercial success, that depends largely on AM radio. Even the confident Roth hesitates when he considers the likelihood of Van Halen's kinetic product getting a lot of airplay. Quote, well, that's a difficult thing. It's hard to get 3 minutes of slam bang on the radio, but you never know. I mean, the Beatles came out with just guitars humming and singing, and bang, look what happened to them. You never know. And then that's the end of the article. Anyway, I would love to get your feedback on this, because it really does seem that popular music goes in these, it's like a pendulum, you know, it gets too ponderous and then all of a sudden it swings back to the basics. And you can look at different periods of time in rock history that happened. Probably one of the biggest ones was when the grunge era showed up in the early 90s. I mean, I remember, I'm going to do a whole nother video about this sometime, but the first time I heard Nirvana, it was like a wake-up call to looking around going, what have we done? Like, music had gotten almost silly with the hairspray and the spandex, and whether you liked Nirvana or the grunge stuff, it didn't really matter, because in the end, because what it did was it kind of like slapped us in the face of get back to basics. And, you know, one of the most successful bands in this world in that idea is AC/DC, for example. You will rarely find a band that is back to basics more than AC/DC has been from the beginning. And that's what they deliver. They deliver basic, straight ahead, easy to get rock and roll. And the other thing that they say in this article that, again, I'd love to get your feedback on, is they emphasize the word fun. This is rock and roll music really, when it first came out, and what it always has underneath the surface is it's just fun music. I'll give you a great example of what I mean by this, how under the surface. Living on a Prayer by Bon Jovi. When you listen to the lyrics of that song, it's almost hopeless. I mean, it's really kind of oh my gosh, this is terrible. These poor people living on a prayer. They're at the end of their rope. They're just trying to survive. But you go to karaoke night and you will see people standing on the stage, dozens of them with microphones, having the time of their life, singing this song of hopelessness. Or hopefulness, but I mean the song about people that are just barely hanging on. And they're up on the stage. I used to be in a band, we'd play this, and it was crazy whenever we would do that song. The whole place would just go crazy, and they're having the time of their life because the music is fun. And at its core, that's what people have always really wanted. And so it's interesting how you look at this, and they bring up this point. And that doesn't mean there's not a place for the music that's more serious and thoughtful, because I love some of that stuff. It's just that we have this way. And again, as I said at the beginning of the video, it doesn't just apply to music. You'll find this in business ventures. You'll find this in all kinds of other types of art. You'll find this in relation. I mean, it's just everywhere that you have this pendulum swing where you ultimately eventually get too far off path, and you've got to bring it back. Remember what it's all about. Remember the foundation of what made this popular, this idea of rock and roll popular in the first place. There was this feeling of rebellion. There was this feeling of individuality. There was this feeling of fun, this independence, this free spirit. And weirdly, even though Van Halen, when you look at them, Eddie Van Halen, truly one of the greatest guitarists that ever lived. Alex Van Halen, overshadowed by the fact that his brother's one of the greatest guitarists that ever lived. He's an incredible drummer, so he kind of gets overlooked a little bit because of that. David Lee Roth was the ringmaster, and he didn't have the greatest voice in history, but he was just this amazing guy standing on that stage, and he's like in charge of the party. And so you have these incredible, super talented musicians, but at the core of what they produce, it's not about how can we be the most amazing musicians, it's how can we make this experience fun for everybody. And when we put that music on, when you put the CD on, when you're playing the record, the tape, or whatever you had at the time, you listen to it and it's just fun. Anyway, I loved this. This really got to me. And that's kind of funny, really got me, since that is one of the songs that was really fun off of that first album. That old Kinks song. Anyway, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. Please follow the channel. Leave your feedback. I'd love to hear your feedback on this idea. What this whole idea of what rock and roll and what this music is really all about, and some of your thoughts. If you kind of see it the same way, or if you have different opinions about that, I'd love to hear them. Of course, like the video. You probably know other people that are interested in this stuff, so share it on your Facebook timeline, send it to your friends, whatever, and let them know about this stuff too. And anyway, with that, have yourself a fantastic day.